So I was talking to my good friend, Father Lappy. We often discuss the gospel and work on the homily together. He's the pastor up in Bremerton, Washington. So we were talking about this the other day, and he said he had a group of school kids that he was going over this gospel passage with. And so he'd say, let's just go through this line by line. So, to the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. Okay, so what does that mean? Dead silence. He said, so kids, so Jesus said, to the person who strikes you on one cheek, offer the other one as well. So if someone came up and smacked you, what should you do? The little boy calls on him, you smack him back. Yeah, this is a tough gospel. This is tough. It's hard to process what Jesus is saying. And it's because it's pretty contrary to our fallen nature, our nature that's been affected by sin. The response that Jesus is calling us for is not this fallen natural response. He's calling for a supernatural response, one that's based on his grace. Not in human wisdom, but in the surpassing wisdom of the gospel. And because this is kind of a difficult to grasp reality, we've heard these words a lot, but when we really want to embody them, it can be very, very difficult. And so I think there's a story that can help to illustrate this. It comes to us from Leo Tolstoy. You might remember him. He's a famous Russian literary figure, War and Peace, Anna Karenina. But he actually also wrote some short stories, so you can read him without having to go through 2,000 pages of a novel. But he lived in the 1800s and at a time of Tsarist Russia, which was a difficult time in that country. And there was a certain period in Tolstoy's life where he had a great simplicity to him, and a very simple and straightforward belief in the Gospels and the power of the words of Jesus. And it kind of shines forth in this short story. The story is called Quench the Spark. It's a very significant title, Quench the Spark. And it's a story about these two families that live next door to each other. And they get along. They've been friends for years. It's Ivan and his family and Gabriel and his family. Their fathers had lived next door to each other for years, and they were both prosperous farmers. They had everything they needed, and they always had grain enough to pay their taxes to the czar and to have, life is good. And they also helped each other. So, if you needed to borrow a tool, that's fine. If you need a cup of flour, that's fine. We share. When there was a little friction, they were always patient to each other, forgiving. And then that changed one day. One of Ivan's chickens laid an egg in Gabriel's yard. And when Ivan's daughter-in-law went to go look for it, one of the women from Gabriel's family spoke a little roughly to her, and the young woman answered back with interest. And then that escalated, and the wives got involved, exchanging harsh words, then the men themselves, until, as often happens in Russian literature, someone pulls someone else's beard. That is never a good sign in Russian literature. And so they went to court over the assault on the beard, hoping to have his neighbor shipped off to Siberia. And Ivan's old father, who had always gotten along with his neighbor, he tried to reason with his son. He said, listen, the whole thing is about an egg. What's the value of one egg? God sends enough for all. And suppose your neighbor did say an unkind word. Put it right. Show her how to say a better one. If there's been a fight, well, such things will happen. We're all sinners. But make it up and let that be an end of it. If you nurse your anger, it will be worse for you yourself. Now, of course, the young people abided by that advice and happy ever after. No, that's not what happened. They didn't listen to him. They wouldn't listen to those wise words, and not a day passed without a quarrel or a fight. Even the little children got involved to assault and steal from their neighbors. Life became harder and harder for them. They're always going to court over one thing or another. The old man kept telling them again and again, "Children, what are you doing? Stop all this payback. Keep to your work and don't bear malice. It will be better for you." But they wouldn't listen. In fact, they're kind of like Abishai from David's friend, right? When he had his enemy there, what did he want to do? He wanted to pin him to the ground with his spear. So finally, one night, Gabriel starts a fire in Ivan's barn. Ivan could have put out the fire immediately, but he didn't, because he wanted to catch Gabriel and have him punished. So the barn burns down and catches his house on fire. And then it also catches Gabriel's house on fire and his barn. And then half the village burns down. All over one egg. Now, the story is fictional, but it's not unreal. Human history is full of violence and conflict, pride and greed and war, retribution and revenge, a story that's led to so much misery and hunger and pain and sadness and loss and hurt and death. A story that we know very well. Even now, we look at the terrible things happening in the Ukraine, Israel. It's just very sad. We never seem to learn. And of course, we think about that in global politics, but what people do to each other, spouses and families and neighbors, what they do to each other, and what is so often a cycle of hurt and retribution. Our Lord, in his words today, call his listeners to something heroic and humble in bringing an end to the cycle. And it's by his life, death, and resurrection that he gives us not only an example, but the grace to actually do it. Because he is calling us to a supernatural life. Left to our own sinful nature, we cannot hope to do what he asks. But through his cross and resurrection, he gives us the power to do it. Again, this is not something that comes naturally to us. It is something that is supernatural, made possible by his grace. And think about it. When he was struck, he did not lash out. When they took his cloak, he gave everything to being crucified naked. He did good to those who hated him. He even healed the ear of the soldier who came to arrest him in the Garden of Gethsemane. He prayed for those who crucified him while they were crucifying him, and asked the Father to forgive them, and even made excuses for them. They know not what they do. He gave, and then gave all. And it is by accepting all of the human cruelty and violence and sin and responding with divine love and mercy that our Lord breaks the cycle. It stops with him and in him. And you can say, like, well, that happens at a cosmic level. And wouldn't the world be a different place if people will put into practice our Lord's teaching? Absolutely. But I cannot fix the world or the vast expanse of fallen human history. All I can do is try to put these things into practice here. And if enough of us do it here, the world will change. In my life, by the words I choose to use, the actions I choose to take. Because I have been his enemy, and you have been his enemy. But how does he treat us? We just heard in the psalm, he does not treat us according to our crimes. but according to his mercy. We must become the new Adam with him, as St. Paul was telling us. Because in this fallen world, forgiveness is how we love one another. Let's go back to the story. So now Ivan and Gabriel are sitting in the ashes of their homes in their village, and it's at that point they kind of come to their senses and they reconcile. Gabriel and Ivan become good friends again. The families even live together while their homes are being rebuilt. But they could have avoided all the heartache, destruction, and suffering if they had simply listened to his dad when he gave them this speech and told them the teachings of the gospel. And this is what the dad was telling them. The malice blinds you. Other sins are before your eyes, but your own are behind your back. But he acted badly. What a thing to say. If he were the only one to act badly, how could strife exist? Is strife among men ever bred only by one alone? Strife is always between two. His badness you see, but your own you don't. If he were bad, but you were good, there would be no strife. Who pulled the hair out of his beard? Who spoiled his haystack? Who dragged him into the court of law? Yet you put it all on him. You live a bad life yourself, that is what's wrong. Christ, when he walked on earth, taught us fools something very different. If you get a hard word from anyone, keep silent, and his own conscience will accuse him. That is what our Lord taught. If you get a slap, turn the other cheek, and his own conscience will rebuke him. He will often soften and will listen to you. That's the way Jesus taught us not to be proud. Do you think Christ taught us wrong? Well, it's all for your own good. It's wise words from that aged father. So I think it comes back to what our Lord is saying. Stop judging and you will not be judged. Stop condemning and you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. Give and gifts will be given to you. Good measure, packed together, shaken down, and overflowing will be poured into your lap. For the measure with which you measure will in turn be measured out to you. Do you want to receive mercy? Be merciful. Do you want to avoid judgment? Don't judge the heart of another. Do you want to be forgiven? Forgive. Who do I need to forgive? It may even be oneself. Do you want to receive? Then give. I think the question comes down to this. Will we try to live by our own lights, our own wit and wisdom, or to live by the words of Jesus, his teaching, his gospel, his words that lead to abundant life now and in the life to come?